It's a very special day. There's a lot of special days in our life, and I'm bringing some new information. I'm going to set this with you here for now. New stories, new ideas, really that kind of aligns with finding our voice. Finding your voice. Has there been times in your life, I know, that you've shrunk back or not used your voice or stood in your truth because of something else, some other story? And I think Father's Day is a moment to really celebrate love, and for me it's to take you on a journey. Are you willing to go with me? This has been quite a bit for me to process this a little bit, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But Father's Day for me, for each one of us, could be the opportunity to stand in courage to the yes when there's so much that may be a stumbling block or something we may shrink back for. Because I believe at different times in our lives, you don't have to raise your hand on this because I know we do it, we are in a battle with fear. But the one thing that I'll say today that you'll probably never hear me say is what we must stop doing. And we must stop kneeling at the altar of fear. And stand in our yes, stand in our courageousness to move to what's next. And I believe there's no accidents that we're here together today, that we're all in this sacred sanctuary, that we've come together in this particular moment on this particular Sunday. And with knowing that there's no accidents, I'll be sharing a little bit more of that through this journey that I'm inviting you to travel with me. Imagine in that previous screen you saw that visual. I know that there were stories that may have come up for you. Imagine a 15-year-old boy stepping off of a ship at Ellis Island. Early 1920s. So it may not be in our context if you say, well, if I was a 15-year-old boy and someone said, take a ship to a new adventure, you might go, ooh, yay, that sounds fun. But we've got to go back in time. 1920s, escaping, boarding a ship from Germany to the U.S. in the 1920s, alone, frightened, carrying little more than one bag, and that's what I brought this out for, the harmonica that hasn't been opened and touched since then until this very week, with a note inside. You want to know more, don't you? Yeah. And in that journey, he brought along, as many of us have done, a journal, well-worn, with intimate thoughts, ideas, worries, fears, little love letter to a girlfriend left behind, poems and rhymes. And what I can gather from this that's written all in German and the translation is some of these were working out the nerves, the anxiety of leaving everything he knew behind. 2.5 days on a train from Germany to Austria to board the boat, the ship. 14 plus days across the Atlantic. Weather affects the timing for various people. And upon reaching the New York harbor, they were then ferried to Ellis Island. And then inspection began and processing. You didn't just, sometimes in context we think, oh, going on a cruise. This is not that. These were horrific circumstances. A lot of times carrying only the water and the food that maybe you had. The conditions were poor. There was a lot of disease and illness. Some people didn't make the journey. But you're 15 and you're in this journey. And the thoughts in his mind written in this journal that's only been opened recently was about leaving family members behind that he knew he would never see again. Ahead of him is also not really possibility, but an uncertain future. Where is it that I'm going? But I've heard it will be better than where I'm at. But there's hope and resilience within this young man that's already been built into him because you see where I told you his place that he's from is Germany, and the village was right on the border of France, so he's already been born into World War I, riddled with war and storms and just having to gather around the table for comfort with the only family that he knew. Now when they arrived, families would usually process quicker. But if you were young, a minor, and alone, they took longer, there was greater suspicion, and there was surveillance. Because they didn't welcome you with open arms saying, "Welcome," like when you step off the boat on your own cruises. They welcomed you with some suspicion. What are you going to be up to? Think about the stories that you already know. The immigrants that came into the country were not treated well. From Ireland to Italy to Germany, they were horribly treated. But yet there was something new because resilience was born into his soul. He was born at a time to where he knew survival was part of his everyday life. And at the time, a lot of families would get together and they would gather enough money and goods to send someone ahead. And the parents would often say this. They'd say, "We'll follow you. Go ahead of us because we'll get there." But what he wrote in here is he knew by their faces, by the tears, by the heartbreak, they were never going to be able to make it. They were never going to make the journey. They couldn't come. And who knew what was happening next? Rough times. And he didn't leave because it was easy. He left to escape violence, oppression, poverty, circumstances that threatened the very hope that he had come to know itself. He came seeking what every parent wants for their child. What is that? The basic need of safety? The basic need to survive? And along the journey, he recognized that there could be a chance for a better life. People were talking about this better life they were going to seek and find. Where and when, who would they meet, where would they go? And so he played this harmonica, which I found so interesting. He played it to comfort himself. But in some of the words in his journal, he said that it also found comfort for other people around him. I never knew that he played the harmonica until I read this, until I found it with the journal. He played these songs that were about fears, dreams, wrote notes in this worn journal. Those simple acts helped him remember who he was while he was discovering who he would be. And Father's Day invites us into that. I believe each time we take the spiritual journey, we're asked to look at those that came before us. Those connected by biology, but the spirit of those that came before us in any way, that protected, guided, sacrificed, to cross unimaginable thresholds so others could flourish. We're all here today because someone gave something, aren't we? Because someone did something that was beyond that moment of fear, but to step into possibility. And I believe that's what we're doing here. I believe that's what we are about. Because if you think about it, you go back in time, 99 years ago, someone had an idea for this sanctuary, this church. There are stories to where there weren't cars, there were horses tied up outside. And you think about the pews in which we sit and which we enjoy, they came out of a church long before that church. So they're older than that. The people that thought and built and prayed and celebrated together in this very place were moving through and into that divine yes, that knowing something else is ahead, but only carrying with them principles, affirmative prayer, stories. But there's something that we also must break in some of these stories. And what I mean by that is this particular immigrant is my grandfather that I'm talking about. I'm just the second generation born here. And in his story, in this journal, in that harmonica, in his writing, I realized born in survival and always in the survival mode, you're always in the reaction mode because your limbic system is activated and you are always in survival. And what do we say in unity is to relax and know that good and God is working with me. So sometimes we have to pay attention to when we show up from fear and we're moving through life in survival, and to rest in the affirmative knowing that the good is working with me. The immigrant story, those that you know for yourselves, those that you may never know the stories, and the generations, sometimes we don't know those stories. I happen to know the intimacy of this one. Is about faith. The story of faith is embedded in this. And Jesus' teachings are right here a part of it. Because every generation asks the question, what are we willing to cross over? What are we willing to move through for the sake of the next future generation? Because we're actually borrowing from the next, whatever it is that we're doing. Perhaps the greatest gift that we are given was the courage to begin again when the future's uncertain. Have you ever been a part of a time where the future's uncertain? At some point in your life? I think we always have the uncertainty, but are we willing to kneel at the altar of fear, as I said? Are we willing to step past that and say, yes, I don't know what this looks like, but this is really a lot of what was happening in Jesus' teachings. He knew this too. There is a universal human longing to always create a better life, isn't there? Don't we do that? Don't we always want to create a better life, not only for ourselves, but for others? Now, my dad being the next generation that was born, this is the fourth Father's Day without him. So he made his transition in 2023. And I've told a little bit of his story here before on a previous Father's Day. But he kept that journal, and he kept that harmonica really close. He wrote me notes in it. He goes, can you imagine? Can you imagine? And he often would tell me about, I never got to meet my grandfather. He made his transition and passed in the late 50s. But my dad would always tell me about, there's something so unique about the two of you, with this poetic writing and this heart-centered and this affirmative prayer. And this is what you do. And he goes, did it skip a generation? What's going on here? I'm like, no, it didn't. You're just following the resilient pattern of your father to survive and to provide. My grandfather left Germany and eventually settled in Texas. It wasn't just a quick hop. It was a long journey, and he met and married my grandmother in Brenham. Anybody familiar with Brenham? Somebody might say Bluebell ice cream. I heard it. He wasn't a part of the ice cream industry. But the downtown courthouses, some of these beautiful downtowns we see in the old town. So that entire downtown area was built with his hands. The craftsmanship, while his name is not on a building, we know his work is there because he began to learn his carpentry skills. And then there was this booming company. Some of you may recognize it, some of you may not, but there was this booming company that came up called Texas Gas. It was under Glenn McCarthy, the famous wildcatter. Anyone recognize that? You might have seen the movie Giant with James Dean, who depicted the Glenn McCarthy time. So it was the big boom and the big bust, but they recognized this powerful, strong, creative carpenter. So the second employee hired was my grandfather for his skills. To build the tool sheds, to break his back on the hard labor, to build the oil derricks, to build those types of things. And my grandparents still sat at the table, as she would tell me often, my grandmother, and make packages and affirmative prayers to send back to family members that he would never see again because the war was raging on in Europe. Like many immigrants, this is something that's true for many of us in various parts of our lives. He began to learn how to hide and soften his accent, to speak with such articulation no one might know, to hide within himself, to not tell the stories of home, the songs of home, the language of home, the worry and fear of those family members he would never see. Because he needed to blend in, right? Do sometimes we do that? Do sometimes we just show up? I know that too, and I've spent my career blending in so maybe no one would know our deep authenticity, our sacred truth. Later, 1931, there was a company that was emerging that was coming up called Magnolia Oil. And the symbol was the magnolia flower. But very quickly they dropped the magnolia flower and it became in 1934 Pegasus, the flying red horse. There's a lot of nods because you're in Dallas, Texas, right? And it would grace the top of their building, the Magnolia Oil Building, which was the first skyscraper. Dallas was booming, and there was this one building with a flying red horse on top of it. In 1937, my dad would enter the scene. He would come into the planet with his sacred agreement. And my dad looked at that Pegasus as he grew, and his father made his transition in the late 50s, but he followed that oil and gas industry. And my dad said, "That's so fantastic." He was looking at Firestone and these other companies at the time, refinery workers. And that Pegasus really drew him. Interesting how it drew me too. In 1966, Mobil Oil Corporation was formed. My dad was one of the second employees that interviewed. He wanted it so bad. Have you ever been at that time and you're young in your life and you're like, "I want this job, I want this job, I want this job." And then I'll get to work and the t-shirt will have Pegasus on it. The cap will have Pegasus on it. And they hired him. But something else happened at the very same moment. My mom went into labor the very same day as the interview. And it was complicated. The phone call was, we're going to lose mother and son, or we're going to lose one or the other. So he stood there. I tell you this story because he stood there again faced with courage. Because as resilient and as we know sometimes we can be, or maybe those that came before us, I don't want to lose this job. This is the bread and butter. I don't want to lose this job. What do I do? How do I tell them? There's so many people in line for this job. But he chose vulnerability, and he chose honesty and authenticity, and he said, this is the story going on at the hospital. I don't want to lose this job. You just hired me. And they responded with grace and with prayer. A new employee. They said, your job is secure. Go be with your wife and child, and we will surround you in prayer. That was me. I was the one coming out of the womb. So it's interesting how these things connect. There's no accidents. I believe that. They responded with grace. And for the rest of his life, it became part of my dad's characteristic. Trust and loyalty. That became really a big part of who he was as his character. And for the rest of his life, he was part of the Mobil Oil Corporation. And I grew up with red Pegasus on koozies, on pens, on paper. I mean, you know, as a toddler and running around and growing up, that's pretty a fantastical creature to have in your house all the time. So it was pretty fantastic. There was one day in the 70s that they said, we are about to expand. And in a sea of employees, we want to know who would be willing to leave their family for a period of time and go to Germany. My dad was shocked and realized that his father had never got to go back. No one ever knew each other. And he shot his hand up and said, I'll go. So he went and started up the Mobil Chemical Company in Germany. Brought Pegasus with him. And they began that journey together, and it was fantastic to see him coming home in the pictures. And I eventually had the honor and privilege to go back twice with him because the first place he went was to the doorstep of his father's home that still exists, and the family still lives there in the generations after. He got to sleep in his dad's bed, sit around the table, and I did too, Troy did too. We sat at the table with the relatives. Now, nobody knows the language of each other. But I don't think you have to know it when you see the tears and the hugs. And oh my gosh, talking about food, you think our potlucks or something. And to be in the church, the one-room school in the church that still stands, that was destroyed by wars and rebuilt and destroyed, and still in that little farming village. In 1999, something big would happen in Dallas and in this company, that Mobil would take the Exxon merger. Anybody remember that? When Mobil would go away, Exxon would come in, and it was Mobil Exxon for a while. But the first order of business was to get rid of the flying red horse. Pegasus would be gone. And my dad boldly said after 30 years, and so will I. The company culture would shift so much, and he would say, this has represented who we are and the character of who we are. So thank you for that early retirement, and I will be out the door. It was pretty bold. But here's the thing, red Pegasus would not disappear from the Dallas skyline. Anybody remember what that was about? That was a pretty big deal. Beyond our fears into possibilities, I believe there's no accidents. Later in my own career, Reverend Barbara, this is going to blow your mind. It's in the 90s. No, 2000s. And I'm working in commercial real estate. I have a portfolio in Houston, Texas, and they say, we've acquired a building in Dallas. Will you just add it to your portfolio? It's not a bad drive. And I'm like, sure, I'll go to Dallas. As I came in and saw the skyline and I saw Red Pegasus, I had a heartwarming moment because I said, oh, there he is. I love him. I know him really well. But then I pulled up at that exact address and I called my dad and I'd say, what was your corporate office address? He told me, and there I was standing. That was our building. So I'm looking at Red Pegasus and I'm pondering this whole lineage and this whole journey. And for the company, for the mobile company, he stood for speed, for power, and for movement and dependable energy. But if we really take a look at the Red Pegasus, when we look at our metaphysics or the mythology or the flying red horse, he stands for transcendence. He symbolizes freedom. He symbolizes a through thread of inspiration, creative vision, spiritual upliftment, courage to rise beyond limitation, to move forward into our yes, into possibility. Just imagine that red Pegasus flying. Isn't it a beautiful image? Do you love him on our skyline? Now the original one is down in front of the Omni Hotel. How many of you knew the story of where he originated? Did you? That's a pretty powerful story and still a part of Dallas. And look at this. Here I am today moving to Dallas, and it was never because I got to get to where that red Pegasus lives. It's just interesting how I stand here today in this very city that I call home. Different generations, same place. There's a through thread, a new view because there are no accidents. 20 years ago, I took my deep dive into unity, and I started discovering unity and going to Unity Church and taking classes. And Dad has been with me all along. He went to every single service, and especially as I moved into ministry, he was always at some place. Whatever city it was, wherever I was, he was there. But one thing he always said, because he grew up in the Evangelical Lutheran Church, the German tradition, he's like, what is this meditation thing y'all do? The lights go dim. There's a little background music. It's a little woo-woo for me. And so we would talk about it, and I would talk about Jesus going into the quiet, Jesus going into the meditation of the quiet. He goes, yeah, but no church I've ever been in does this. And of course, depending on what church it is, it's sometimes different. It could be singing bowls or all sorts of things going on. And he goes, I just don't know about that. Years later, we were at the lake where I grew up, and we were out on the boat. I don't fish anymore, but at the time, Dad had his line in the water. It was that still lake, you know, the ones with the sunset, the forest right around you. It's just slick. His line's in the water, and we're just sitting there just in such peace. And I said, Dad, he said, yeah. I said, what are you doing? He said, fishing. I said, yeah, but what are you actually doing? He said, nothing. I'm just still. And I said, but what's on your mind? He goes, nothing. I said, well, tell me about what that is. He goes, it's just peace. Don't you see the slick water, the nature around you, just quieting my mind, being in the stillness? It's just like God is palpable right here. And I said, oh, you're meditating. And he looked at me, he said, oh, stop with all the questions. So later in life, as he would go through transitions and troubles and worries and fears and busyness, because his retirement was much busier, as I hear a lot of people are, after his career. He was so busy, and he would be stressed out on the phone. And I said, it sounds like you need to go fishing. And he knew I meant to go to meditation. So from then on, when he would go to church, he would say, are we going to do the fishing thing today? And I'm like, absolutely we are. We fish every single service. Jesus' deeply embedded Jewish tradition had an amazing connection with his Father. And what I want to say is the one that would walk beside him and raise him, Joseph, but the one that he would affectionately know and call Abba, which translates to Daddy. We're not limited to a one-way relationship with the divine. Not something far off, removed as a deity in the sky, so far away we can't feel the connection. Not a God and authority over us, but an endearing kinship within us. And that is love. In the Gospels we hear, I and the Father are one. We are not separated. And we're called into that divine relationship. One of the most beautiful, I think, transcendent shifting stories in the Gospels is the one in Matthew. And some of you may know it intimately, or this may be the first time, but it's the baptism of Jesus. And Jesus came from Galilee to go to the Jordan to be baptized by John. And the scripture is written this way. The metaphors are beautiful here. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up and out of the water, it describes. And at that moment, the heavens opened up, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my Son, whom I love, and with him I am well pleased." Do you know that message is for each one of us? That is our message. Because a new dawn was breaking open. I believe that was a threshold moment. That was a crossing over of seeing something in his own life beyond who he was, the human and the divine, in that moment. And it was a divine affirmation. My grandfather's story in that journey is the similar story. Moving into an unknown but not knowing what that looks like. Jesus broke through thresholds and awareness into a new consciousness. And that's what we're up to if we choose to not back off and shrink our voices, but to move forward into our yes. To stand in courage with our yes and not bow to fear beyond all the noise. Because we have a lot of noise in our minds and our thoughts and in our world, and to move to our yes. So today we do honor all the dads, the pops, the uncles, the brothers, the cousins, those that have stepped in and stepped up to serve and support for the next journey, the next generation. We're doing that here in this church. There are those that we are following, but there are those that will still come, and we have work to do. My grandfather in his journal, and with that harmonica, kept repeating, and almost in a song like, "Do not be afraid, only believe. Do not be afraid, only believe." And that's from Mark. Mark 5:36, "Do not be afraid, only believe." Can you just imagine that journey? Don't be afraid, only believe. It is good. Don't be afraid, only believe. It is good. What a beautiful affirmation, right? Again and again, Jesus invited people to do something more than what was facing them. Fishermen left their nets, their livelihood, their families. A tax collector left his booth. Think about that. Ordinary people stepped up and beyond to unimaginable circumstances because the journey of faith begins with one question to be answered, and the word is yes. Yes to the next step, yes to our healing, yes to forgiveness, yes to new possibility, yes to a life even when the outcome remains uncertain, because that's the definition of faith. Many of us, I believe all of us, are on a long voyage. We're on a journey in consciousness toward new horizons, trying to see, oh my gosh, don't we want to see where it's going? We so desperately want to see where we're going, but we can't see what's in front of us because there's uncertainty. But hear and know that this life is meant to be good, and we're here for a purpose, but we move forward with vulnerability because life's greatest blessings rarely happen sitting on the shore. Breathe in that. Sometimes it could be a journey, a trip. It could be a new job, a career, a relationship, and we go, oh, I don't want to do that. But yet we go ahead and move forward, and then the most brilliant circumstances happen in our lives. With God, all things are possible. It's not a promise that everything's going to be easy, right? But we know it's a reminder that possibilities often appear only when we begin the action steps and moving our feet. And that's what we're doing here. You're here today, you're a part of this community because we're doing that. And we need each other. And I need you. So this week, consider this. What would one courageous yes look like? You don't have to act on it because it could be really big, but you could just consider, if I said yes to this, maybe journal about what that might look like. What if I trusted that life was working with me at every moment? What next step would I take? Always know that this journey is big, and we're on a big journey to new possibilities. And each one of you on this journey, in consciousness, you matter. Each one of us are sacred. We're here today because of those that came before us, but we're also building what is next. And so we take that journey together. And always remember, with your hands over your heart, you are loved. Happy Father's Day.